Let's take a closer look at Ultrafine 400 from Photo Warehouse. I wanted to do some more film comparisons to Tri-X like I began earlier in the year. But to keep things consistent, rather than do them every now and then, I went ahead and got 49 different film stocks, everything I could get in 35mm from B&H and Freestyle. So unless they were out of stock, I got a roll of it. Now, if this part of the video seems familiar, it's because I'm using this portion of the video for all 49 of them rather than record it 49 times. So if you want to skip ahead to the H&D curves or the prints, time codes are right over here. For those of you that haven't seen this part of the video before, here's what I've done. So I wanted to use each film with the exact same shot, which is a headshot of me with a Kodak Gray Card Plus, which happens to have a red, blue, and green patch, a cyan, magenta, yellow patch, and then a dark and a neutral flesh tone. Then, with those shots taken, I bracketed every shot in third of a stop so that we can make sure we have a negative of equal shadow density to the base target film of Tri-X. Now, the reason I use Tri-X is because it's just been around for a long time and it's a very popular film. So it's a good base film to compare everything to. Then, once everything was developed, which was developed in D-76 at stock for the manufacturer's recommended time, I printed everything on Ilford using the exact same aperture, contrast settings, developer, and everything. The only thing I changed was my exposure time, and that was to make sure that I compensated for any base fog variation from one film stock to another. Other than that, everything was left the same so that we can have a comparison of just the qualities of the film. Now, there's going to be some differences in contrast, especially on the high end, and that's because the manufacturers getting their development time may not have used the same target that Kodak used for Tri-X. And that's okay. We're not looking at the overall contrast for everything. What we're really looking at is grain characteristics, tonality, how the film treats the shadows versus the highlights, that sort of thing. And we're looking at spectral sensitivity, thus the Gray Card Plus, rather than just a regular Gray Card. So we're going to go ahead and look at H&D curves, which if you saw one of my earlier videos on sensitometry, I like to use pen and paper and make my graphs. However, my wife was really ready to make sure I was done with this project. So she put everything into a spreadsheet for you all. So even though I don't like them, I want to show them to you thanks to her. Then we're going to go ahead and look at the prints side by side with the same print made from Tri-X. And from there, you can decide if you like the film and if you want to go and use it. So let's go ahead and take a look at the curves, and then we'll go to the prints. Here we see Tri-X in blue, the Ultrafine in red. And the Ultrafine has a toe similar to the Tri-X, so I expect to see shadow performance similar to Tri-X. And then the straight line portion, a little bit flatter. That could be adjusted with the development time. It does shoulder a little bit at the top, but probably not enough to affect a lot of the highlight performance. But since it does diverge quite a bit from the Tri-X here, we might see a little bit less tonal separation in our print examples, but a little bit longer development time might make them a lot closer to one another. So let's go ahead and look at the print and see how this works out. Here we have our Tri-X 400 and our Ultrafine 400. First impression, this is a little bit underdeveloped, looking at my highlight being a little dull compared to the Tri-X. Other than that, it's pretty good. It's showing maybe a bit less separation in the highlight areas. We can see, I feel like we're getting, despite the fact that this is developed a little bit better than that one, I feel like the gradation in the mid to high tones is better in the Tri-X than here. These look a little flat, like they're just not getting that really good bit of separation that makes the tones pop out a little bit like the Tri-X. So that's just a little bit difference in the curves. That can be dealt with in the printing step. I could print that with a little bit higher contrast and so forth, but overall just the film a little snappier here in that tonal separation. The spectral sensitivity is virtually identical, so I see no real difference there, if any difference at all. So good spectral response, good shadow response. This is exposed at 400, so we are getting full box speed with this. That's good. The only thing would be a little bit longer development time, and I would say, off my own experience, particularly with all of these film tests, the mid and lower highlight separation, the response I'm getting here is a bit more like an Ilford film, like FP4 or HP5, where I'm just not quite getting the separation in those tonal values like I am here, but I'm still getting really good shadow separation through areas like that. That's just my own experience, but your photos may show a little bit difference based on what you like. All right, let's zoom in and look at some of the particular grain and sharpness areas to see what this looks like up close. All right, taking a look here, when we first see our grain, it looks very, very similar to Tri-X. The grain size is very close, if not exactly the same. That's good. So we are getting a nice 400 speed performance. The separation between the low values, which I feel like we're getting a good example here, seems pretty much on par. So that's good as well. All right, we can see a couple of spots immediately where I did not dust the negative before printing. Oh well, not going to bother doing that with 50 some test prints going through in a couple of days. Other than that, we have good tonal separation in the low and mid tones of the shoulder. We still have nice detail of the fuzzies on my shoulder, the fabric as it is silhouetted against the background, and we can get still a good clear shot of the grain structure compared to Tri-X on that smooth background, and it looks pretty good. All right, let's look at the other shoulder and check the detail there. So here we can see the sharpness in the ribbed fabric collar, the stitching on the shoulder, and the weave of the fabric itself. So for 400 speed film, with that fine, small, sharp grain, we are getting good detail and texture in that smooth fabric. We're getting good, sharp detail in the ribbing of the collar, the skin, everything like that. So excellent performance here for a budget 400 speed film. All good things. All right, let's look at the face. All right, looking at the features here on the lighted side of my face, we have good detail in the fine features under my eye, in my forehead. As I said before, we are not quite getting that tonal separation of the upper mid, lower highlights in my skin. Yes, it is slightly underdeveloped. However, even if it were developed a little bit more, I don't think we're going to necessarily separate those tones. So what we're doing is we're kind of getting into a shouldering effect where those high values just don't separate. We can make them brighter, but that doesn't mean we're going to see much of a difference between exposure tones. So other than that, for a budget film, this turned out a fantastic performance. I was very surprised by it. I've not shot this film before. I wouldn't necessarily make it my go-to 400 speed film. I do like a little bit more highlight separation personally, but for some general work, I think this would be a good film to use. Now, I did find that it only came in a 24 exposure can for 35mm. I don't know if a 36 is available or if they were simply sold out when I ordered this. If you need to use a 36 exposure, like you're a student and the school department requires that, this may not be the right choice. Price-wise, however, it is less expensive than Tri-X, so it may be a good film to use there. When I eventually do comparisons for 400 speed films, we'll see how this looks next to something like HP5, which I find does not have the same highlight separation that Kodak does. This is reminiscent of that. We'll see a little bit more side by side later on down the road. Otherwise, good film, decent performance, nice price. Get yourself a roll and test it out for yourself. All right, that's it for this week. Thank you for watching. If you would like to help support this channel, you can go to my Patreon page. You can get t-shirts, lab towels, and prints from the links down in the description. I appreciate your time watching, and we will see you next time.